Hello, good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7 here at Broadcasting Scotland with me, Donald C. Stewart. We've got our usual smorgasbord of delights and topics of conversation tonight, and I am equally delighted to welcome our guest for this evening, who's former MSP for Glasgow Kelvin, Sandra White. Sandra, delighted to see you.
Delighted to see you too, Donald. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you. And of course, as always, we will begin with our Ukrainian update, which is now day 419 of the illegal Russian war against the state of Ukraine. And today the Kremlin has reported that Vladimir Putin visited military headquarters in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. The Kremlin also stated that Putin has attended a military command meeting in the Kherson region. He heard reports from commanders of the airborne forces, the Dnieper army group, and other senior officers on the situation in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich has appeared in court today to appeal against his detention in Moscow in charges of espionage. The court rejected the appeal. On Monday, the US ambassador to Russia, Lynn Tracy, said she had made her first visit to Gershkovich. Poland and Ukraine will resume negotiations early today on reopening the transit of food and grain, Polish Agriculture Minister told public radio station PR1. Russian forces are stepping up their use of heavy artillery and airstrikes in the devastated eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces said today. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, told his Chinese counterpart today that their country's military cooperation was a stabilizing force in the world and helped to reduce the chances of conflict. Evgenia Karamurza, the wife of jailed anti-Kremlin activist Vladimir Karamurza, told LBC that she was baffled by the UK government's weak response. Introducing sanctions against the perpetrators would actually be a very practical step that I would very much like to see, she said. And the UN's human rights head, Volker Turk, urged Russia to release him, while Baltic neighbour Latvia sanctioned 10 Russian officials and lawyers involved in the case. G7 foreign ministers have condemned Russia's irresponsible nuclear rhetoric and its threat to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus as unacceptable after a 3-day meeting in the Japanese resort town of Kurizawa. The G7 leaders warned that any use of chemical, biological or nuclear weapons by Russia would be met with severe consequences. The Pentagon said it expected findings within 45 days from a review into how the US military handles classified information after last week's arrest of an airman over the leak of a trove of highly classified documents which ended up online. Russia has said that it had repelled an illegal Ukrainian attempt to infiltrate Russian territory in the southern border region of Bryansk 11 days after reporting a similar incident. Sandra, there's a lot in there that you listen to and you think, by heavens, you have a bit of a cheek, this suggestion that the Ukrainians might have gone into Russian territory and it's illegal. The fact that they have arrested and detained a journalist is probably the one that sticks out as well. And the sort of narrative that China and Russia cooperating together is making us all safer. It all appears like, I wonder if Donald Trump's press secretary has actually got a job over in the Kremlin. It all appears to be rewriting the truth and reality, does it not?
It certainly does. I mean, it's bad enough when you look at the newspapers. You can hardly believe anything, really. Is it good news, false news, bad news? Is it the truth? I find it very difficult, and I think most people do, to work their way around what's coming out there. One of the things that struck me, apart from obviously people being arrested and this war continuing, is the amount of talking that's going on and nothing absolutely getting resolved. And to go to a Japanese resort to talk over things really is a bit of a slap in the face for the people of Ukraine who are living, within a war-torn country and cities. A shortage of food, heat, etc. as well. I mean, I just say to myself, when is it ever going to end? When is it going to end? And a bit of a controversial, I suppose, point to put across is, who's making money out of this? People are, arms are being produced and they're being sent to various areas within, obviously, Ukraine, unfortunately, and obviously Russia as well. So there doesn't seem to be an end here, but somebody's making a profit out of it. And I think, perhaps we should be looking at that part of it as well, instead of all the talk. Let's see some actual action in regards to trying to get some peace here. Can't just talk all the time. And the UN and others have said this before. I just call them toothless tigers, basically. They talk all the time, but nothing seems to happen.
And moving from Ukraine back home, the talking has been done, and today Humza Yousaf has outlined the new Scottish Government priorities, hopefully to ensure that we're going to see things happening in his new government. First Minister Humza Yousaf delivered his first major statement to Parliament today, outlining his key priorities for Scotland. A new policy prospectus was published alongside this statement, setting out how this government plans to deliver for Scotland over the next 3 years. In his statement, the First Minister said 3 missions centred on the themes of equality, opportunity and community will be central to the government. He revealed that the launch of the deposit return scheme will be set for March next year, that proposals on alcohol advertising will go back to the drawing board, and that the Scottish Government will consider ways to use business rates to boost business and further support communities. The prospectus detailed the key aims the government intends to achieve through working alongside the Scottish Green Party. A series of actions were set out within the prospectus and by the First Minister, aiming to tackle poverty, building a fairer and greener growing economy and improve public services by 2026. These included an explicit commitment to support economic growth in order to help business and trade to thrive. The confirmation of a further £1.3 billion investment for the Scottish Child Payment over the next 3 years. An action plan to increase housing in remote, rural and island areas, including an investment of up to £25 million to convert suitable properties into affordable homes for key workers and others. A 6-month pilot removing peak time fares from ScotRail services from October. The delivery of 6 new vessels to serve Scotland's ferry network and a doubling of the charge point network for electric vehicles to at least 6,000. Reinstating Scotland's participation in the Trends in International Mathematics and Science, TIMSS, and Progress in International Reading Literacy, PIRLS, studies to increase the availability of internationally comparable data on Scotland's education performance. Seeking a new agreement with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, COSLA, a lot of acronyms tonight, to support the delivery of shared priorities, and legislation to give councils powers to apply a local visitors levy on overnight stays in commercially let accommodation as additional means to raise revenue. In his concluding statement, First Minister Humza Yousaf said, "When I was elected as party leader, I promised that I would never pretend that government is easy. It is not. And I would not offer promises in the face of difficult challenges. The document we are publishing today sets out our determination to honour that commitment." Sandra, in amongst the furore of the last few weeks and months, I suppose it's important to focus in on what a Yousaf government is likely to deliver. And there are some things in there that I think are particularly innovative and different from what others are suggesting. Scottish Child Payment, for example, clearly important. I'm captivated by this idea of removing the peak time fares, because that surely will help those who are going to work at those peak times and potentially provide a little bit of a boost to them. But across the board, there's plenty in there for people to get their teeth into.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are, Donald, and I think some of the issues that they brought forward are very practical, such as the visitors' levy, which I'm very supportive of, always have been. They have had that type of thing, although it's called a tourist tax in other countries in Europe. But that is a great thing to enable local authorities, and they've been crying out for that as well, to get some extra revenue in. because desperately, well, obviously I'm from Glasgow and I represented, Glasgow, mostly city centre as well, and I know how much we need some money's being put in to local government for the people and for businesses as well. So that's a very practical move. I think I really welcome that move. The other one I think is very, very good is the fact of second homes, increasing the council tax for that. Basically, obviously, lots of the Airbnbs will be caught into that as well. And I think that's a very practical move as well. And long-term empty properties, increasing the council tax for that too. So that's two good practical moves which fit into the working with COSLA and local government as well. They're also looking at, council tax and various other things too. So these are practical, and obviously, the rail fares as well. It will help people. I mean, if I was going through to Edinburgh, I think it's £27 return, basically, and you've got to go through, if you were going through before 9 o'clock or after, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you're paying the full rate. So I think that would be very, very helpful for people. But one of the things that struck me when I was looking through some of the policies, it was under Neil Gray's policies or under his cabinet of the wellbeing cabinet. And this, I think, is important, really, really important to push forward. And I take my hat off to Hamza for what he's trying to do. And obviously he is digging his own furrow. He is his own man in this particular point as First Minister. And that was the fact that they were push, and I use this word, push for more powers in regards to finance. I think that's really important. I mean, we know that they've got the bedroom tax and obviously the child payment, which is something which really no one else has got at all in the UK, and the Scottish Government are very proud of that, and they should be. But we're mitigating an awful lot of what's coming from Westminster, which is causing the poverty amongst people. So whilst I really, really welcome all of the moves that's been put forward today about equality and public services and communities and health as well, actually, the crux of the matter is that we don't have the powers to do what we want to do and we should be able to do. So I'm pleased that I've seen that under Neil Gray's umbrella, of the wellbeing economy. I think that's something that has to be pushed. We can't just mitigate constantly for the ills or the crimes, I would call them, which has been perpetrated on people and making them poorer from Westminster. We have to push for those extra powers as well. And I'm hoping that's something which will be at the top of the agenda too, as well as the more practical motives that we can do with the devolved powers we've got. But we have to keep pushing. We have to keep pushing for more powers. And I noticed under the Social Security as well, employment, etc., they're talking about that, which is reserved powers, getting more powers from them. So working in tandem, I think it's a very, very good call from the First Minister, and that's what we have to do. Ensure that we push for more powers whilst using the powers that we have at the moment under devolved legislation. But we need to push for those powers as well.
I think as well, it's that thing of a well-being economy, in contrast to what could be, those of us old enough to remember the sick man of Europe that Britain was described as in the late 70s. That what we've got down in England as part of this island is a thrust that is almost like an illness economy, whereas up here it's showing the distinct way in which we are attempting to go about our business. And instead of expecting a blank checkbook, what we're looking for are the powers to manage ourselves, and that shows a distinct difference between north and south of the island.
Well, absolutely. And you mentioned as well about ferries, about the new ferries, and I just caught a piece on the news in regards to Greece getting, I think it's 1.4 billion. I'm not sure the money's anyway. It was something like that anyway, for them to build ferries for the European Union. That's something we could have had. And we have to also highlight what we are missing because we're no longer in the European Union, because obviously that's our 40, well the SNP's 40 is basically for independence and be in Europe. So we've got to marry all of these facets together whilst obviously operating a very good government. I mean, all the things that's been done, particularly prescription charges for instance. Now that's a lot of money for people that can't afford it if they've got to get a prescription. You seem to forget about that. It's £10 in England. We don't pay prescription charges here, That's a huge benefit to the people here in Scotland as well. So we have to talk up the policies that we put forward, which are beneficial for prevention of illnesses as well as treating illnesses here in Scotland, and all the many, many other good things we've done with pushing for more powers which we could do even more with, such as the monies that came from Europe which no longer come here, that we could have benefited from and the people of this country could have benefited from too.
Indeed, and of course, if Hamza Yusuf is going to be honest enough to say that leading a government is difficult, then being the leader of the SNP has been also, over the last couple of weeks, a particular challenge. News today that Colin Beattie, MSP, the SNP Treasurer, has been arrested in connection with SNP finances. Arrested as a suspect in connection with Police Scotland's ongoing investigation into the finances and funding of the Scottish National Party. Beattie was taken into custody and has been questioned by Police Scotland detectives, and a report will be sent to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. Sandra, obviously an ongoing investigation is something we cannot make too much of a comment about, but one of the things that I did hear people talking about today was the timing of this seems to have been rather odd, given that the Scottish Government was about to stand up on its feet and deliver the next 3 years and the policies. Anything that people should read into that, do you think?
I thought exactly the same as you and many other people. All of a sudden, Hamza, who's had a very difficult time, even when he was elected as First Minister, it should have been the time for, right, okay, let's go on with the job. He has constantly had to back things off and not really been allowed to be himself. But I think he's done a really good job. He's took it on board and he's become a real statesman in that respect. He's got stronger. So I take my hat off to him for that as well. It's had a really hard job. But it just seems rather strange that this happened at what you would call an opportune moment or an inopportune moment, just when Hamza's trying to put forward the government's, programme for government, then all of a sudden Colin Beattie is arrested. And the fact that what I can't get my head round is, and I don't know the ins and outs of the law, I believe if you're arrested just to be questioned, you're innocent till you're proven guilty. Nobody said anybody is guilty. Basically, it's because you can have a lawyer present. That's the only difference I can see with that, or basically being questioned. But I don't even have enough fingers in my hand to say how many people in the Westminster government have been questioned. Basically, you've had Rishi Sunak, you've had Michelle Moe, you've now got David Mundell. I could go on and on, Boris Johnson, I could go on and on and on. And even the Electoral Commission that was in 2019, I think it was, is the most recent one that came out where, millions of pounds, they didn't answer the question, the Conservative Party, and then the Electoral Commission has said they didn't think it was in their interest to pursue any further. There was questions over where this money went. It's just the differences now. I know we have our own legal system here in Scotland, but it can't be that different, where you've got a tent erected in somebody's house and you've got stuff taken out of your house and you've got somebody arrested, etc. Well, I just question, please, what is going on here? And it is opportune moments, whatever side you may be on, in regards to Colin being taken in, if they'd said taken in for questioning, but arrested. It's a very strong word, arrested. And I would like somebody, maybe a lawyer, to explain to me, or maybe Donald, I don't know, to explain to me why it is it's called arrested or under suspicion, whereas it's interviewed when it's anybody in the Tory government down south. I can't quite understand that. And I don't think I've said anything out of turn. Certainly I think a lot of the media have said stuff that are out of turn. But they never pick up on the Westminster situation, where it's billions of pounds. I just can't get my head round why this has been going on. I have my thoughts on it, which I'll keep to myself, basically, because you say it's an ongoing investigation, and you use the word investigation as they do when they say you cannot comment on this, it's ongoing investigation. So why do they have this huge headlines, people being arrested? A caravan, poor Peter Murrell's mum, 92 years of age, all of that stuff. I find it quite unbelievable. And do you know, Donald, the people out there find it pretty unbelievable as well, for the people I've spoken to anyway.
I think that's one of the things. Do you think there's a possibility that this could backfire? Because you mentioned there about Hamza becoming more statesmanlike. And certainly what this does is cause a break between the previous regime, if you like, and the new one. So that there is a possibility that people will see them in two different ways. But also that coming through this, it's so early in his First Minister stint, premiership, that there's a possibility that he will rise above it and that he'll actually be the leader that people think he was never going to be.
Well, I mean, he certainly's had a baptism of fire. There's no doubt about that. Who would want that? You know, it's certainly been a baptism of fire, and he's had to contend with so much. I mean, he was never on the NEC, as far as I can see. Didn't know. He's already said didn't know anything that was going on, etc., etc. So he's coming from it the same as I would be coming from it, or people from the public would be coming from it, basically. Didn't know what was going on. We don't even know if there's anything untoward going on, basically. But yeah, I see him rising, above all of that, and he's been very statesmanlike, and I'm very pleased in that fact that he hasn't let this, because the pressure must be absolutely enormous. But what I can't understand is this absolute onslaught for everything at all. It's just been quite unbelievable. As I said, people I speak to, not people who are members of the party, or in fact some people who don't believe in independence, have said themselves to me as well, and I'm sure other people, that I can't believe all this is happening. I mean, tents parked here, bins being taken out, black bags, all that. People, it's going to backfire on them. I think it's already backfired on them. I don't know what Police Scotland, who is leading this, investigation, I'll call it. I don't know who's in charge, basically, but I think it'd be helpful if they came out and told us exactly what it is they're looking for. Because nowadays, is it £600,000? It's party funds. It was party members that gave money to the party, and then all of a sudden you've got this huge investigation of erecting tents outside somebody's house, and absolute intense, media attention on this type of stuff. Some of it has been very brutal when you watch it. The questions that's been asked, for anybody else, that would crush you. It would really crush you. And you really have got to have hard shoulders to take this all on board. So I would appeal to, if you're a lawyer out there, could you tell me what the difference is here about being arrested and being investigated? And I would appeal to the police. Could you tell us what's going on and how long this is going to last? Basically, I think that's what people want to know.
Well, and news today, on a more positive note, is the labour market statistics for Scotland, as they were released, according to HMRC, show that there are around 2.44 million payroll employed employees in Scotland. That is an increase of 50,000 from 2020 pre-pandemic numbers. The UK unemployment rate at 3.8% is close to historical lows. Commenting on this, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, said while unemployment remains close to historic lows, rising prices continue to eat into paychecks, which is why halving inflation is one of our top economic priorities. From December 2022 to February 2023, Scottish unemployment fell to 3%, the lowest Scottish rate it has been since 1992, and it is 0.8% lower than the UK rate. In a statement regarding the labour market statistics, Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray, as we mentioned earlier, said, "The Scottish Government is committed to getting even more people into work, including parents, disabled people and those with health and caring responsibilities, through employability and skill support, high quality early learning and school-aged childcare provision, as well as improving access to flexible working." Well, Sandra, there's Mr. Hunt sharpening his elbows, getting in there, taking credit. and all the rest of it. The rising inflation we created is eating into paychecks because we're diminishing them. We're not going to give people as much as they deserve. But, you know, good on us for doing something, whilst in Scotland we are outperforming the rest. And I suppose that's one of the things about the announcement today from the Scottish Government. It's not just about the headlines, it's about the effect that these policies have upon the safety, security in our communities that feel confident enough to go and gain employment.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to shake your head and wonder when you listen to Hunt and the other ones down in Westminster. They created the high inflation, as you said, Donald, earlier. They created the high inflation, tell people they can't get a rise in their wages, but the bankers can get away with whatever they like, and so can most of the Westminster MPs with the Tories, basically. So you've just got to say two different parallels altogether. But it's good news for Scotland, and it does show that the policies that we have pursued, the Scottish Government have pursued over the years, are starting to work. And once these other policies come in about equality and opportunity, which is a huge one, opportunity, it'll get even better. But the sad thing is, you wouldn't know about it unless there was programmes like yours or people who were putting things out on Twitter and independent people. Because the media, for some unknown reason, isn't interested in good news stories for Scotland. And to me, that is the saddest thing. And it's came even more to the fore. It doesn't matter what Scotland does. If it's better than what it is down south, then it's never reported. And I think that's a huge issue. And we need to tackle that. You've got to ask yourself, well, I think we all know why, but a good news story like that, the Scottish Government's working. I mean, it's fourth in Europe for education. There's some great stories coming out, and obviously the employment issue as well. And yet, if you had to look at the papers, if you had to see the media, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know that it was a good news story for Scotland, that this had actually happened.
You referred to some of the really good stuff, the prescription charges and so on earlier on, Sandra. Is this the additional challenge that the new government in Holyrood has to try and find a way to get some of this across into the media so that people are able to understand the benefits, not just of independence, but also of that progressive policy framework that they have brought into being?
Well, absolutely. I think some of the problems of the past, well, not the past government, okay, the past leadership of the government, not just one person, but obviously there is a group of people there, is that we did not rebut these things enough. We didn't rebut them. We were always on the back foot rather than the front foot. And one of the questions which was asked of Humza, who obviously is First Minister now, at the hustings and other areas as well, was, would you put forward a rebuttal unit? Would you fund a rebuttal unit to ensure that we rebut the bad stories and get the good stories out? Now, I would say 90% of the people that was at the hustings that I was at asked for this. And Humza said absolutely he would. So I'll hold him to that promise, as most people will. I know it's very difficult, and as I said, programmes like your own at least gets news out, and we can basically get it out there for people to watch. And I would ask you to watch more of Broadcasting Scotland and other channels similar to yourselves. This has got to happen, because we can't just sit in our own wee bubble and say this is good, we're doing a good job, look at what we've done, if it doesn't get out to the rest of the people. Now, Kate Forbes, when she was in her bid, and she still says it basically said that we have to persuade the no's to come over to yes. But if we can't get this good news out of what the Scottish Government is doing, how will these people who are on the cusp of coming to yes, they're not too sure, how will they ever cross over if they don't know what's happening? And I think that's a real challenge, but it's not beyond anyone to do that. So Humza had mentioned that he had promised and said this, that he would set up a rebuttal unit. And I would hope that has been set up just now. And we have to do that, because the media is not giving their fair share to the the good stuff that's coming from Scotland, and it is very good. Other countries in the world see us for what we are, a progressive nation, and yet, if you look at the British press, you would think we were just all doom and gloom and nothing happens in Scotland apart from bad things. So it's got to happen. We've got to have this unit to push forward the good and positive issues that's coming out of the Scottish Government.
And we go from media in the UK to media in France. As news today that a French publisher has been arrested by the UK terrorism police. French citizen and foreign rights manager for Edition La Fabrique, Ernest Moret, arrived in London from Paris yesterday to attend the London Book Fair. Upon his arrival at St Pancras Station, Moret was pulled aside by plainclothes police officers acting under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act and detained for questioning without a lawyer present. The police officer justified the detainment by claiming Moret had participated in demonstrations in France. While detained, it was demanded that he give up his phone, his computer, and passcodes to the officer. This morning, Moret was formally arrested and transferred to a police station, accused of obstruction due to his refusal to give up his passcodes, and he remains in police custody. In a press release today, Edition La Fabrique said it is crucial for all defenders of basic democratic values to express in the strongest terms that we find this intolerable and outrageous, and called for a protest to be held outside the French Institute in London. Sandra, I read this and I'm speechless. I simply am. I just don't get it.
No, I don't get it either. When you look at, well, obviously Scotland didn't vote for Brexit, but, England did, London didn't, voted for Brexit, which meant we have nothing to do with the EU. We've got nothing to do with Europe or anything else. And this man comes over he's demonstrated in his own country, and then he gets arrested. It's very, very worrying, actually, very worrying. And he's still in jail at this moment in time for demonstrating in his own country in France, which we say we don't want anything to do with, and he's sitting in a cell because he refuses to give his phone up. Where are we going here? Where is Britain going here? Where they must have seen him coming in, they must have tracked him from Paris to London, obviously when he got off the plane, to his passport, etc., etc. This is worse than a police state. I don't want to say what I think it is, but I think most people know what I'm thinking and probably think the same themselves, which, if it happens there, it could happen to us as well. It's very, very worrying. No reason whatsoever to arrest this man. And I don't know if the French government, or the ambassador, have they come in and said anything? Has anybody else been involved? Or is it just the Met Police or the terrorist branch of the Met Police who have arrested this man because he has been demonstrating against his own government in France, and he comes to the UK and he gets arrested? It's like a science fiction movie. You couldn't make it up.
Indeed, and from conflict down in London, we go to a far more serious conflict between military forces in Sudan. Violent confrontation has broken out in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, this weekend as the Sudanese armed forces clashed with the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. 185 people are reported to have been killed and more than 1,800 have been injured. The conflict can be traced back to last December when a preliminary deal to end military rule in Sudan was signed. However, the deal left issues around the military and security sector unresolved, and questions around how and when to integrate the RSF into the military were left also unanswered. Rising tension between General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who broadly has the loyalty of the Sudanese armed forces, and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the RSF and a former warlord, has resulted in all negotiations being paused earlier this month. The conflict escalated last week when the RSF started stationing forces around the northern town of Maro, a strategic location with an airport and an electric dam on the Nile, and in other major cities, despite objections from the military's leadership. The violence threatens to deepen the humanitarian crisis in the country as rising food prices, devastating flooding, and disease outbreaks have left citizens incredibly vulnerable. Millions of people are now stuck in their homes due to the violence, reportedly without water or electricity in the final days of Ramadan. Hundreds of those injured in the crossfire have been evacuated, and the World Health Organization has said that some hospitals are already running out of critical supplies to treat wounded citizens. Neighbouring countries have expressed their dismay at the situation, with the presidents of Kenya, South Sudan and Djibouti planning to travel to Sudan to help mediate the crisis. Every time there's a story about Sudan, it seems to be one where things are getting worse and never better. And this is like two wee boys with toy soldiers falling out, which would be the story if it wasn't so serious. This is a country riven by division. The military took over in order to transition from the previous military regime to some sort of democratic power. And they can't even get themselves sorted to even begin that work. It seems terrifying.
It is. It's terrible. I mean, the Sudanese people, it's always the ordinary people that suffer. And I know there's been torture in Sudan. Amnesty International has reported on it as well. And, we have the situation in Ukraine at the moment, obviously. But, you've got the Sudanese situation now. You've got Yemen as well. It's just as if, as you said about Sudan, they maybe get back up on their feet and then they're knocked back again. And it's always factions fighting. And it's always the poorest of the people that suffer, who have got nothing. And I go back to what I was saying at the very, very, very beginning, the war in Ukraine. It's been going on for so long. And basically, people are supplying weapons, obviously. It's the same, and maybe not to the same extent, because it's a war between the factions in Sudan. But, they are getting supplied with weapons from somewhere. Somebody's making money out of it again. And here we have the people who are, as you said, have no water now, hospitals are running out of water. There'll be another famine there again. People will just starve, and there'll be a disaster appeal again. When are we ever going to get round to all of this, which is actually happening, and why these things actually happen? It just seems to be, it lurches from one crisis to another. And yet it's the ordinary people, the poorest of people, that suffer all the time. Now, I wonder if these people, if they were able to basically look for asylum, would they be welcomed here in the UK? Or, how would they even get out to claim asylum? Because there is a war going on there now. Okay, it's between each other, but would they be welcomed? Should we be looking at that? As a disaster in that respect, if there are people seeking asylum from there, should the world look at that to help, or even say they're going to look at the fact that people are in this war-torn country and they deserve to seek asylum? I don't know.
Heaven forfend they would have to depend on Suella Braverman to come to a decision. It's a bit like pouring oil upon the fire, but it's interesting in terms of, you're right, somebody must be arming both sides or arming one or t'other side. And we've seen that during the 80s and during the 90s, where there was not the race to Africa, like in Victorian times, but the race to arm those organisations who were going to end up in power, so that your influence and your access to the mineral-rich deposits that would be in those countries was what drove foreign policy. We are now in a position where that foreign policy is perhaps less obvious in the West, more obvious in the East, but we have the sinister things like the Wagner Group and other paramilitary forces and people who are weapons experts and dealers who seem to make money out of this appalling misery.
It just lurches from one thing to another. And I used to read the reports, you would do the same as well, Donald, when people would say, and I hated this fact, people would say, oh, well, these African countries are always fighting. These African countries can't, agree amongst each other as if it was their fault. But it's interference sometimes of other, African countries, but also the West as well. And you had a very good point, Donald, when you mentioned the minerals. These countries are rich in minerals, and they've never had the opportunity to basically use that to benefit their own citizens. It's been exploitation of these countries, and it lurches from one to another, and nobody ever really gets into the actual facet of it. Why is it these countries are really rich in minerals and yet they're always poor? And there's usually a dictator there, but the dictator is usually backed up by other dictators or other countries who really don't care what happens to the people. They just want their hands on the minerals, and that, I think, is the key to, I mean, it won't happen overnight, obviously, but we should be looking more at that. It just seems to be, because it is in Africa, we turn a blind eye at times on that, and we blame the people there, when actually, when you look back, or even just now, it's been Western countries it's been exploiting for all these years. I mean, they put the debt on these folk, and they can't afford to pay it off, basically, and then they start taking their minerals out. And it's a vicious, vicious circle. And that's why I think if Scotland was independent, international as well, we could perhaps look at these types of things, because that's what I want to see for Scotland. I mean, it's a civic nationalism Scotland's got. It's an international country. I'm an internationalist. We could maybe do something to help in these countries, and I think we could do something to help in these countries. It's been on for far too long, and we need to look at the crux and stop the West and others from basically interfering and also taking the riches out of these countries. Because, as I said earlier on, it's the poorer people that suffer all of the time.
Of course, there's no prizes for guessing which particular country had their toe in the bath of Sudan in the
Yes.
20th century. But we go from there across the other side of the world, and the United States with the defamation suit between Dominion Voting and Systems and Fox News, which has begun today. The $1.6 billion defamation suit between Dominion Voting Systems and Fox corporations began in a courtroom in Wilmington, Delaware. The tribunal will take place over 6 weeks as Dominion attempts to hold the news network to account for its role in the 2020 election. The trial was scheduled to begin on Monday, but Eric Davis, the Delaware Superior Court judge overseeing the case, pushed it back without giving a reason. It was reported, however, that both sides were engaged in negotiations over a settlement that would avoid a trial. Dominion, a company which makes hardware and software that's used in elections, claims that Fox News knowingly defamed its business following the American 2020 presidential election. Fox repeatedly broadcast false allegations that the company had paid government bribes, switched votes, and was founded in Venezuela to rig elections for Hugo Chavez. At the heart of Dominion's case are internal messages from Fox hosts and executives in which they openly say they knew the outlandish claims about Dominion were false. The company may have strong enough evidence to show that Fox acted with actual malice, that Fox knew the claims were false, or that Fox acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Media's been a bit of a strain through tonight, Sandra, and one of the things that here, of course, is Fox News in America just now. Wonder who owns GB News. I wonder who owns all these things that are popping up on the internet that are given some opportunities to current government ministers, former government ministers, to interview other ministers, like Talk TV and the rest. So what happens, wasn't it that if you get a sneeze or a sniffle in America, you'll end up with a cold in Britain? Here we have something that hopefully is a bit of pushback, because Dominion have taken this very seriously, and at $1.6 billion is not to be sniffed at.
No, absolutely. No, I mean, they used to say whatever happens in America 10 years hence, it happens here. Basically, it's maybe taking a bit longer, but I hope it opens a window. I mean, you've already got, obviously, the Daily Mail being taken to task, to court by various people, Prince Harry as well as as others as well. So that's a start, but that's went very quiet. We're not hearing a lot about that just now. But I think it's a great thing. I mean, America's supposed to be, well, one of the best democratic countries in the world. Obviously, it's not. We know that. Same as Britain's not a democratic country either, and it's even getting even worse and worse now, basically. But I'm looking forward to watching this, trial take place. Even you mentioned, Donald, that it was delayed for a day because they were in talks of some form of settlement. So obviously, there's something there, and Fox News, obviously must be. I don't know what's happening, but if they're talking about settlements, I imagine somebody's going to give somebody some money. But if the company wishes to push it and get to the truth, they won't accept a settlement. But when you talk about GB News and that type of thing, and I remember Ian Nicholson questioning them on, it wasn't the Scottish Affairs Committee, it was committees on in Westminster, and saying, well, these ministers, I mean, you've got cabinet ministers and you've got Tory MPs on a Tory-run and funded, well, I don't know if it's funded, but run television programme, asking each other questions and just talking about the great things that the Tory party are doing. That goes against the law, apparently, you would think. But according to here in the UK, and the Commissioner, it doesn't go against the law. And it's very, very worrying. So whatever comes out of this, in America, it can only be good, I think, for what's happening here in the UK. It's a warning shot. If they win this case, which I hope they do, then basically I would think they would think twice here. Perhaps Ofcom would look at this situation, as you mentioned it earlier, Donald. And just as a wee aside, when you spoke about elections in Venezuela, I was an international observer in Venezuela when Chavez was standing, and he won that particular one. And I can tell you, I mean, there was 4 checks before you could even go and vote in the Venezuelan elections. I don't know how you could, anything could have happened in regards to that. You had ID, you had fingerprints, you had stuff on digital, etc., before you were even allowed to vote. So I hope they take them completely to the cleaners, and it's a warning for what's happening here in the UK. And Ofcom should be looking at it very carefully, because I don't think they have done themselves any great favours in supposedly being, the Westminster situation being democratic, because what's happening with it is certainly not.
Indeed, and that has to be, for those of us who have any connection to the media, the hope that somehow that Ofcom find their dentures, because they're clearly in a glass somewhere, and they need to get them out the Steradent, back in and bite back. Because I think that one of the major issues here, of course, is that there are people who will willingly take on board what Fox News are saying. And it doesn't matter how logical you are, you're still going to be looked at as if you're mad that you would believe the truth. And if it's 1.6 billion, I just hope that what it is sufficient a dent, because reputational damage, I don't think, touches the side of Fox News or indeed of the Daily Mail.
No, no, absolutely not. I mean, they've already been, well, take the Daily Mail, for instance. I mean, they've already been shown to have tapped people's phones, followed people, told lies about them. And you're looking at, I think, as you started your introductions earlier on, and we were talking about the media, you don't know what's the truth and what isn't the truth. Because look at the stuff that's coming out just now, in regarding to what's happening in the SNP. I mean, half of it is untrue. And all they need to do is look it up and say, oh, actually, they weren't there at that particular time, or whatever it may be. And this is a big worry. People have got so used to this, instant news that you're getting, on Twitter and other platforms. But when it's actually moved into the actual news. I mean, I hear people out there saying the only news they watch is Channel 4. They don't watch any other news. They only watch Channel 4 because they feel as though that is the one that gives them, the best news. Apart from that, they don't listen to anything. And obviously, the newspapers, the circulation is completely dropping Most people, if they're going to look at a newspaper, will look at it online, look at the headlines, and that's it, because they just don't believe. But the longer it goes on, yeah, you're right. People will start to, go back to it perhaps. But I think when you look at the journalists and the editors, I mean, some of the stuff that you look at, it's untrue, and then they give a wee apology at the bottom of the page. But the damage has been done. But the damage in the long term has actually been done to them, because their distribution is completely falling. And before you know these journalists won't have a job. They'll be out of a job because there won't be anybody buying their newspapers. So really, in the long term, they should actually be reporting the news. I mean, there's only one newspaper that I read online right enough, but there's only one newspaper, I wouldn't name it, that I read, which I think probably gives us the best, but sometimes even falls short. But as for the rest of them, I mean, they're just completely collapsing. And it's something they should be looking at for themselves, apart from anything else.
In fact, yes, indeed. And moving from how the news is delivered, we go back to some good news today as the NHS Community Glaucoma Service has been launched. Thousands of patients shall be cared for at their local community practice for optometry rather than in the hospital as part of a new NHS Community Glaucoma Service. The flagship eye care service is being rolled out in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and will expand across the whole of Scotland over the next 2 years. The service is expected to register an estimated 20,000 patients once complete. As part of the Community Glaucoma Service, patients with lower risk glaucoma or treated ocular hypertension will be safely cared for in community optometry practices. That's been more tricky tonight than most of the names in the Ukrainian update, but they are going to be treated closer to home rather than at the hospital in order to help reduce waiting times pressures in hospitals. Marking the launch at Munro Optometrists, one of the first practices to offer the service, Public Health Minister Jenny Minto said, Scotland is regarded as a world leader in community eye care service provision. We are the only country in the UK to provide free, universal, NHS-funded eye examinations, and our investment in community optometry services has helped reduce the burden on GPs and secondary care services. I am very pleased to celebrate the launch of this new flagship NHS Community Glaucoma Service in Glasgow and look forward to seeing more patients across the country benefiting from the rollout. Sandra, it's one of these things, and going back again thematically to some of the announcements today from the Scottish Government, the NHS is struggling. And anything that can be done in order to look at the pinch points and reduce the pressure is surely a good thing. And the more that it gets closer to the community, rather than having people to make long distance travel arrangements, when many of them may not be able to do that in outlying areas, particularly around about Greater Glasgow and Clyde, surely is a good thing.
It's another great story, and I look forward to it being pushed in the press, but I doubt very much if it will. It's another great story for that. I mean, you have went for eye tests, I've went for eye tests, most people have. I was absolutely amazed at how thorough it was, how thorough the eye tests were. Basically, I just thought I was going in to get my eyes tested and then get glasses, etc. But you get through the whole thing, you're there for an hour, and they can spot anything: glaucoma, macular disease, even tumour behind your eye. They can spot all of that through that, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. It's a great thing that they're doing, and similar to what I mentioned about prescription charges, it's another world leader, and it's also a preventative issue as well. And now that they recognise if you've got glaucoma, then you can get treated there and you don't have to travel to a hospital. And that's really what the NHS should be about. People turning up at accident emergency for various issues, whereas they can get treated in the optometry. Also, the pharmacies as well do a fantastic job. They're all trained. They do fantastic jobs, and I think the way that is going, that is the way to go. Public health, people can access it on their doorstep without having to make an appointment, without having to queue up, and it opens up the hospitals for anyone who's got more serious issues, and that's what the people want. When I was on the health committee and we went round the country asking people what they wanted, They wanted services to be for them and to be local and not have to make an appointment and travel an hour to go and see someone at the eye infirmary or at the hospital or even the doctor's surgeries. They wanted it to be working for them. And I think, obviously, a report that came from the Health Committee, hopefully they've listened to it, because here's another strand where people are able to get the services they want locally without having to make an appointment. And as you said earlier, Donald, that's, it's a world-leading service, and that should be shouted from the rooftops. And that's what I'd like to see in the so-called rebuttal unit or whatever it may be. All of these things put down, this is what you get. And, put it out every hour. I don't care if people get fed up looking at these things. Just stick it out every hour and remind people that if Alistair Jack and the rest of them get their way, I mean, they're already trying to stop us from going to America and all this kind of stuff, which might be a good issue for your programme next time round to discuss that. Here we are, we should be putting out the positives, and we could lose all of that, lose it, if what they're trying to do is basically take the powers away from Holyrood. We have to put that out. So I hope you're listening, Hamza, and take this on board in the rebuttal unit to push that out there and just throw it out every day, every hour, and let people know this is what you've got and you could lose it.
Indeed. And finally tonight, Historic Environment Scotland, and quite an exciting news item, has rediscovered a Roman fortlet along the Antonine Wall in West Dunbartonshire that has remained lost for hundreds of years. The discovery was made using gradiometry, which measures small changes in the Earth's magnetic field to detect archaeological features that are invisible from the surface. This geophysical surveying technique enabled archaeologists to look beneath the soil and identify the stone base of the fortlet without the need for excavation. The fortlet likely would have been one of several along the wall. It would have been occupied for weeks at a time by around 10 to 12 Roman soldiers who were stationed at a larger fort nearby, most likely to be Duntauchar Fort in Clydebank. The fortlet would typically have consisted of two small wooden buildings and will have been used by the Romans during their 20-year defence of the Antonine Wall. Commenting on the discovery, Riona McMorrow, Deputy Head of World Heritage at HES, said, "It is great to see how our knowledge of history is growing as new methods give us fresh insight into the past. The discovery of the fortlet has led HES to review the site's designation to ensure that it is recognised and protected as part of the Antonine Wall, which is one of Scotland's 6 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. This fortlet is the 10th to have been found along the wall, and there are hopes that the continuing geographical survey will offer a deeper understanding of the wall." Well, Sandra, as a previous history student at the University of Glasgow, although my time in history was centuries after this, but this is pretty exciting. That, we are discovering more and more about the past, and we're discovering more and more about the people who tried to conquer us. And although the Romans never managed it, they have left an indelible mark upon us, not just the environment that we live, but in our language and our culture and everything. So again, this adds to the offer that we can give to tourists, adds to the opportunities they can to come and see something different up here.
Yeah, absolutely, Donald. I was I was going to mention that fact about tourism as well. Basically, we have got so much to offer here in Scotland, and it's a very, very exciting discovery. I love history as well. I must admit, I didn't go to Glasgow Uni. I went to Glasgow College, which later became Calais University, basically, and I did some history there as well. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I learned such a lot, basically. But I think it's a great thing, and the folk of Clydebank will be very proud. I'm sure Martin Docherty, who's the MP for that area, will be very, very proud as well. Duntauchar is an area where there has been, a lot of poverty in that respect, and obviously the shipbuilding and all that stuff as well. There's a vast amount of history and culture in that area. And I always think if you get something like that and get the local schools involved, which was always something I like to do, get the local schools involved, get the kids interested in it, because you can't know your future unless you know your past, has always been my saying, basically. So I hope I'm sure they will anyway, get the local schools involved, get them out there, get them taught about it. It's exciting, and get it on the tour map for local people as well as visitors, basically, because you can't have too much of it, you can't have enough of the history of Scotland, and we're still discovering, simply because we never ever get taught it at school, I must admit. Scottish history, I certainly didn't anyway. But to get this in an area like Clydebank, where most of the kids are not so much the kids, maybe of our age even now, and that only know about the Blitz and the shipbuilding and all that. But to learn more about the Antonine Wall and everything like that, I think it's great. It's a great opportunity to open it up to the school kids in the area.
Absolutely. And it takes us to the end. And of course, what we have not discovered, Sandra, is the value of your contribution. As always, it's been fantastic. Thank you very
I've
much for
enjoyed
joining
it.
us.
It's been really good. Very, very international as well as local. Thank you.
Thank you. And that is it for this evening and for us. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So before I ask for contributions, here's a thought. Tonight we've talked a lot about the media, we've talked a lot about where we get our news from. And sometimes the democratic deficit is not going to be filled just by people joining a political party, but by finding a way in order to contribute not just to the common weal, but also to the way in which we report it. So if you are able, please support us by making some form of regular donation. And for those who have made the commitment to do that and make a regular monthly payment, on behalf of all of us here, thank you very much. We've made a commitment that our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland to allow us not just to make the programmes that you've seen tonight and at the weekend, but also to develop the organisation into something that will be a very huge positive contribution to Scotland's common weal. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. And that could be something that you contribute to, or indeed come and be involved in. So from me tonight, Donald C. Stewart here at Broadcasting Scotland, and from all of us who are behind the scenes and who joined me tonight to chat things through, it's good night and thank you for watching.